So let's talk real quick about how plants eat, because this is actually very relevant to gardeners and all of us who are trying to grow healthy food and live in a more sustainable, resilient way. So we've all heard about photosynthesis to one degree or another. And whether we remember the equation for it or not, basically the idea is that plants, or rather chloroplasts within plant cells, take photons, take energy from the sun, and with the combination of CO2 and H2O, are able to make sugar. Now, they then use this sugar in their bodies the same way that we do. I'm sure you've all heard of ATP and all of that. So basically, cellular respiration. So plant cells is actually really cool. They've got not only chloroplasts, but they have mitochondria, just the way other eukaryotes do as well. So they are able to make their sugar that they eat. But that sugar isn't the only thing that they need. Just like us, they also have a lot of other nutrients that they need, right? They've got to get nitrogen so they can make the amino acids and then make proteins, and they need other more, I suppose you could call them unusual nutrients, like they need a little bit of nickel and they need some selenium and cobalt and all of those things. So how do they get that? Those nutrients, for the most part, come from the soil. Now, the roots take them up, and there's I'm not going to get into which tissues do what, and there's a couple of different ways, but basically it comes in through the roots. Now, how does the plant get the specific elements that it needs? So pretty much any surface dirt or soil is going to have all of the elements, and I'm talking about chemical elements, that a plant needs to survive. Companies will try and sell you things to add this and that, but really it's there in the soil. So how does it get into the plant? Well, over the millions of years of evolution, plants have figured out something pretty interesting. They take some of that excess sugar that they made, and they produce things called exudates. Now, exudates are essentially sugary, sweet juices that they release from their roots into the soil. And they've got all kinds of different recipes for that are going to be preferred by different organisms. And what happens is, let's say the plant needs some nickel, right? It will release an exudate into the soil, into its rhizosphere, that's going to feed a particular bacteria that will set off a chain within the soil food web that will enable those organisms to take the nickel that is present in the soil in a form that the plant can't use and transform it into a form that the plant can, and then the plant can take it up through its roots so it can get what nutrients it needs in the form that it needs at the time and the amount that it needs, simply by releasing these exudates, these sugars, into the soil. So it's not like there's one specific species that will do what the plant needs it to do. There's a lot of different species that work in concert with each other, but there is a chain of reaction. So it might be it feeds a particular bacteria that starts to accumulate that nickel in its body, and then that is eaten by a protozoa, that is then eaten by a nematode, that's eaten by a fungus, on and on, until it is released back into the soil through the waste or the dead body of, or something like that, so the plant can take it up. The plant does that with all of the different nutrients it needs, which is just, I think, pretty amazing that they're able to do that. So that's one of the reasons that having a really healthy soil is important, because you need to have all of the different players to be able to make that chain happen for all of the different nutrients that your plants need. Now, if we take, here's where it's a little bit unfortunate. If we take a fertilizer and we stick that into the soil right on our plant, so let's say you put a nitrogen fertilizer on. So that is a water-soluble form of that element that the plant needs. However, it's actually force feeding that plant because the plant does not have an option of whether it's going to take that into its body or not, because it's in a water-soluble form. So the plant takes in the water, and with it comes that fertilizer, comes that nutrient. So the plant can literally overdose on that particular nutrient. The other thing that can happen when we apply fertilizers is that they can actually kill off portions of the soil food web of those organisms. So when the plant goes to ask for it, releases its exudates and says, hey, I'm hungry for copper, right? And some of the organisms needed in that chain are missing. So it doesn't do as good a job of getting the copper to the plant, or it can't get to the plant at all. So we are hurting our plant's ability in most of those cases to be able to access the food that it needs, even though we've given it a lot of nitrogen or phosphorus or whatever it was that we were supplementing it with. So what can we do instead? Because it's really common to see the advice, even within the organic gardening community, which has been, of course, very heavily influenced by the conventional industrial gardening and farming community, to the point that we don't even stop to really think about, what is this concept of fertilizer? But what can we do instead? So the thing that we can do instead that's going to help our plants is to build as healthy of soil as possible. So that means making sure that we've got organic matter. So we can introduce that through not removing the dead plants, right? We just chop them down and leave them there on the soil surface. Soil organisms are going to move on up and start eating that. So we can also protect that soil with a mulch to protect it from the UV, to make sure that we are keeping the temperature cool or warm depending on the season, and keeping the moisture in there that they need to be able to survive. We can make sure that we aren't spraying or putting any poisons, pesticides, whether those are herbicides or fungicides or anything like that, onto our soil and killing off that system. And then another thing that we can do is we can actually introduce back some of that life. We could do that with compost. The point of compost is to introduce those organisms. It's not food for the plants, right? We're not trying to fertilize. We just need those organisms to be back in the soil doing their job. Or we could actually do a compost tea, which is essentially inoculating the soil with these organisms, a very concentrated form of liquid that has lots and lots of these organisms depending on what type of soil we are going for. So those are couple of different things that we can do to feed the soil, which is then what feeds the plant. So the plant eats the sugar that it makes through photosynthesis, and then it asks for what it needs from the soil food web, from the soil organisms, and they provide what the plant needs to do the best it can, exactly what its body needs to grow.